Well, you're refreshing them. I was wondering what you were doing. I'm like,
And there we are. Sorry. It took me a minute to see that we were on. Hi, it's Sarithkin. I'm here with our second episode of Leveling Up. Tonight, I have invited my husband, Sir Vilius, to teach us how to construct a rattan sword with an emphasis on putting the thrusting tip on and using his tool dip method. I'll kind of let him take it away, but he is affectionately my armor fairy. He does all my sword construction. He does a great job, and I'll let him go for it. Thanks.
okay, so what I usually use is 1.5 rattan, but I use 1.5 because when I first started fighting, I used 1.25, and I found once my technique was good, I would just break the sword so fast it would bend, and it was useless. 1.3 is the same, so eventually I went with 1.5 rattan, and I find that it lasts the longest. It's about the right weight. Yeah, and then we plane it down to just with a regular hand plane. I just put this in a vise, and then I just plane it until it's 1.25 inches. I highly recommend planing your swords for whatever reason. I imagine there's some mathematical formula for it, but a plain sword flows better. You can feel it. I don't know why, but it does. So I highly recommend planing your swords one way or the other, even if you use great big rattan. Oh yeah. I don't actually even recommend using great big rattan. You can use 1.5 plain to 1.25, and it's heavy enough that you should be able to strike with sufficient enough force. The heavier the rattan, the slower you are. I also find the heavy rattan breaks faster because there's so much mass that it crushes its own self. Misty did ask me where I get the rattan from, and I don't really have a source. Amazon used to have it. I don't anymore. So what I tend to do is I just watch every now and again. They have them at events. Every now and again, somebody buys a huge bulk and I get some sticks. I almost always have at least one stick, if not 3. So if I have less than one, I'll buy more and buy 3 at a time, kind of thing. That's all I can think of. Oh, the length. Standard length for me anyway is usually 36 inches because they come in 9-foot lengths. So if you have 9-foot pole, you cut it 3 times or 2 times, then you have 3 swords that are 36 inches in length. The actual sword that I use, being a Roman persona, is shorter. I use a 30-inch sword, which is more like a gladius. I've actually gone shorter. I don't recommend any shorter than 30 inches because the shorter you go, it becomes really light and it's hard to generate proper power to hit somebody and they'll feel it. I've tried 28, I've tried even 18, and unless it's a mace, it just doesn't have enough mass. You lose everything in your cuts, you lose all your range. I also don't think you should go any longer than about 38. It starts to get draggy and very long, and your cuts become very loopy and slow. But to each his own. There's nothing wrong with using longer or shorter.
So do you do anything to get the rattan ready by like taking some of this off or rounding the tips or anything like that?
Okay. Sometimes I do. Sometimes the seam is really big and huge, and then I'll just sort of run the plane of the belt sander over it so it's not quite so lumpy. You can usually straighten them out. This one has a little bit of a curve, but it's nothing really all that big of a deal. The other thing that I do after I finish planing it is I will feel the sword, even without the handle, of course. I'll feel the sword one way or the other, and one way will feel better than the other. It's usually the density of the rattan or maybe the curve makes it funny. Don't know what it is, but one way feels better than the other. And then I'll mark it where I want the handle, and usually go from there. What I'll do
Like
is
with a Sharpie or?
Yeah, usually. So what I'll do is, like, let's just pretend this was the end that I was making a belt on. I would do that, and then I would mark where the end of the tang is and where it is on this side too. Just with a felt tip pen works fine. and then I would carve my handle. When I first started, I would use just a razor knife. I highly recommend these Olfa blades. They're strong and they're really good for carving the handle. And then once you get it down to a certain point, you could use rasps. If you know what a wood rasp is, it looks like this. It takes the wood off really well, then it sands it down pretty good to the point that it takes off fast enough that it's effective. But after making a million swords, or however many I've made, I bought a belt sander, and now I just basically sit it on the belt sander and just run it over and over until I get the grip that I want. The grip is huge. You absolutely should carve your handle, even if you have gigantic thick hands, even if your fingers are really long. You should always carve your handle down. If your fingers are sore after fighting, if your elbow or wrist is sore after fighting, your handle is too big and you've got too much of a death grip on the sword. I know people say that the bare rattan fits their hand really well. It doesn't. If you look at pretty much any tool ever made, every handle looks like this. Even my drill, same idea in the handle, same kind of shape. It's sort of almondy shape, I guess.
Including a sword, right?
Yeah, even swords look like this. So carve your handle down. It's so important. It makes you be able to have an easier, nice, relaxed grip when you're throwing shots. It takes all the stress off of your wrist and elbow when you're hitting because you're not having to hold the sword hard. And if you want to try an experiment, get some really thick rattan or something big like PVC and hold it in your hand and try to move it around and see how hard it is. And then even pick up a broom and see how much easier it is to move the broom around. It's a huge difference. Cannot stress enough how important it is to carve your handle down. I know that some people say that when they carve it down, their sword breaks. I've actually never had that happen. I suspect what's happening is if your sword is breaking here after you've carved your handle down, you've got a death grip on it and it's creating a point for it to break. I have never, even Misty carves her handles even smaller than this. Well, I carve her handles smaller than this, and they never ever break. So there it is. Carve your handles down. Most important. Take nothing else away. Carve your handle down. What's next? Oh, next. So once I have this, I've planed it down. I've used the belt sander to get this down. If it's for Misty, I give it to Misty and she'll tell me thinner or thicker, one way or the other, or sometimes it's this dimension. And then I'll go until she's happy with it. What I recommend for the new people that are trying to make this kind of handle, is get a hammer or something, carve your handle, grab your sword, sort of make it sort of go in your hand, and then pick up the handle and feel how it feels in their hand, and then go back and forth until they feel very close.
And you also mark my preference for the front of the blade and the back of the blade too, right?
Yeah, that's another thing. Like I said, once you finish planing it, grab one side or the other and feel which way you like it. And then once you put the handle on, do the same thing, because sometimes it just feels better one way or the other. Like this way feels a little uncomfortable, this way feels even better. So that is totally fluid until basically you put the trigger in the basketball block. So what else?
Because sometimes I'll tell you I want something in the front, and then we'll carve it a couple times, and I'll change my mind.
Yeah. So actually, Misty, if you want to grab your sword right there, I can show you that handle. I put a trigger on my swords. I know that some people like triggers, some don't. I am a big believer in the trigger because of the loose grip. When you have a nice loose grip, your trigger is controlling your sword for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Misty's handles are even a little bit smaller than mine. You can see how quite thin that is. So, I mean, you can go, and this sword's fairly old and it doesn't break. So I highly recommend it.
I've never had a sword break at the handle.
Yeah.
Ever.
Some people like 2 fingers in the trigger. Some people like 3. I personally like 1. I've even seen a thumb trigger. It's all up to you. That's all your preference. But I still recommend the trigger over a lanyard because I think it teaches you good technique with the loose grip and how to flow with the sword. Yeah, so how I put the trigger on is one of the next steps, and I do that by I always use strapping tape. I think just about everybody does. In fact, that might even be in ABCs, I don't know. Might be. But so I get Misty to hold the sword, and then I give her the trigger. So the trigger I make out of a piece of thin leather, nice soft leather. I think this actually might be fake, but it doesn't really matter. I've tried all sorts of things. I've made them out of tape. I've made them out of strapping, like strapping webbing tape. I've made them out of like just a leather foam. Just a nice thin piece of leather is the best. It's really comfortable in your hand. It actually even kind of forms to your hand.
I love it because the longer you use it, the softer it gets, and it does form to your hand. And I switch between 2 fingers and 1 finger, and the leather lets you do that. So.
And also, as the sword flows around in your hand, the nice soft leather will flow with it. It sort of helps orientate your blade, and it also moves with it, so it's not rigid in your hand. So, big fan of soft leather. So I get Misty to put the trigger on her fingers, however she does it. And then she will usually, so she grabs the trigger where she wants the trigger. Some people may like it further over, some over to the side. That's where Misty likes her trigger. I don't know if you can see that or not. It looks like you can.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So then I grab the basket hook. And if you want to, what usually, I don't always do it, but depending on how inconvenient it is, you can just put a temporary piece of tape on there. Because I marked where the handle goes, I'm like 99% sure that this will fit perfectly in the basket hook. But before you make sure it's really on there, you definitely want to try it. Because I've definitely put the trigger on and put the basket hilt on. I had my hand jam up inside the basket hilt because the trigger was either too short, or I had it bottom out because the trigger was too long. So then I just loosely tape the trigger on, just 1 piece of strapping tape, and then I put the basket hilt on again with just 1 loose piece of strapping tape. This is just to locate the trigger and make sure it's right.
Buy quality strapping tape.
Yeah, this isn't very good. It's what they have at the store. I actually like the 3M or the Scotch tape strapping tape. I find it the best, but
you got what you could.
I got what I could. Yeah, that's what they have. Again, 1 real quick piece of tape. And all we're really doing is just making sure that our hand fits in the basket hook without bottoming out. So this is very personal, of course. If you're making it for somebody, they need to try it out. So Misty's going to make sure that her knuckles don't jam up and her hand doesn't bottom out.
Perfect.
Which is good. Okay. So the next thing I recommend doing, I usually just take it off now. Except I didn't do that right because I'm doing.
Be nice to yourself.
Yeah. So there we go. I got my sword right in the right spot.
So a lot of people were taught to use what are those things?
Hose clamps?
Hose clamps. Why do we think that's not great?
Because they're metal, and hose clamps seem to invariably come loose. So metal on our sword when we're smashing each other sounds like a really bad idea to me. I actually started off using hose clamps. They would invariably come loose, and I'd always have to tighten them up, or the tang off the hose clamp was so long, I'd have to really tape it down to get it down. And then I went with these really awesome stainless steel hydraulic hose clamps that never came loose. But it was quite the effort to put on the basket hilt. And then I saw, I believe it was Optimusadi's, just tape his on. And I'm like, that works? And I haven't gone back. So I'll show you how I put that on in a second. So what I do now, well, I'll give it to Misty because it's maybe her sword, but is at this point, make sure your trigger is on there really well. So I go around once or twice with the strapping tape, nice as tight as I can make it. Try and make it so you can see it, just like that. So I'm keeping the tape super tight and I'm pushing it down with my thumb at the same time. This can also be done in a vise if your arms aren't quite strong enough. Doing it in a vise will keep it all nice and tight. So there, my trigger's on. That'll be more than enough. And this is an important step. At this point, go out to the pell or a post or a tree or anything and swing at it a whole bunch of times and hit and hit and hit and hit and hit. And then if you start to develop a callus or a blister on your hand at any spot, find out where that spot is on the sword. Like grab your sword again, and go, okay, well, I got a callus on my index finger pad. So you find that spot where it would be on the sword, and then get your rasp or your belt sander in my case, or even the knife, and you just file off that one spot wherever you're getting a blister. And then go out and do it again until you don't get blisters anymore. Blisters on your hand is a sure sign the handle doesn't fit your hand, which that should never happen. I mean, I remember when I first started fighting, my hands, they were awful. Now I found out this technique, and funny thing, I never had blisters on my hands anymore. So that's an important step. At this point, go test it out and make sure you're not getting any calluses or blisters or anything on your hand. Even a slight, like, warm spot, file it down a little tiny bit, just because it'll make it so much happier for your hands. So the next step is to actually put the tip on. I wish I could tell you what type of foam it is that we use, but in my experience, it doesn't really matter too much. I really like this foam. It squishes really well, but it maintains a lot of structure when it does. Like I said, I wish I could tell you what kind of foam it is, but there it is.
Like a gray close cell.
I think it is, yeah. Yeah, I know that, but I've done this technique with a whole bunch of different types of foam. They all work great. So not that big of a deal. This is just my favorite. I think it's the.
Where do you get your foams?
We got it from the foam store here in Seattle. I think you have to buy a minimum requirement. So when I first moved here with Misty 15 years ago, we bought a sheet that was like, I think 2 feet by 2 feet, and I still have this much left. So, and it wasn't expensive. I don't even think it was $20. So foam store, you can even tell them what you're trying to do. It needs to have lots of compression, right? Because that's the whole point of what we're doing.
But then it has to come back.
Yeah, it has to come back and hold its shape. So I think the closed cell foam is the actual right name of it.
Yeah.
So what I do is I cut a piece of foam that is roughly a square or more or less the rectangle of the end of the sword, and it needs to be just a little bit bigger. And we do this because when I tape it on, I'm going to compress the foam just a little bit to shape it. A little bit too small isn't great. It doesn't really work as well, and then you end up with mostly tape instead of foam. Too big, it looks like it's got this great big lump on the end of your sword, and it looks awful. I hate that. What else can I say? Yeah, so I attach it first with glue. I've tried a bunch of different types of glue. It doesn't seem to matter too much. I use hoop, but it could be anything. I think I've even used wood glue because I didn't have any glue at the time. Better glue, of course, holds it on, but there's basically a diminishing returns point where the foam isn't as strong as the glue. So, I mean, there it is, right? So I get my sword and my tip, and I get a bunch of pieces ready. You want to cut, I don't know, 6 pieces or so, about 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches. And it's just convenient to have them all ready like this, so you're not stopping every time.
Antonio says the closed captioning is not all that accurate.
Okay, so pretty straightforward. I put a little bit of glue on the rattan. This is actually an old stick that I turned into a stick for me, but
I think it's a little ironic that you won't make me 38-inch sticks, but you'll make yourself 30-inch sticks. I'm just saying.
Yeah, when I changed them, you didn't notice. Okay, so I usually put it on end, but you can't see the camera. Okay, so I take the tape and I put it in the middle of the foam, and then I pull down just a little bit. I don't know if you can see it squishing. Yeah, I'll put it on and then we can see. Okay. So you can see I squished it just a little bit. You can see how the foam is pushing out. If you squish it too much, then you lose all the compression, and there's no point of even having it on there. But we're going to use this to make it streamlined with the sword. So that's kind of what we're going for when I tape this down. And so I go basically one in more or less every direction. I wish I actually could remember who showed me how to tool dip the tip, but I can't. I don't know who I gave credit to.
Was it Marcus or Avalok?
Oh, it was Avalok. Yeah.
It was Avalok.
Yeah. He made really nice swords. Like he made a shamshir and he made lances and stuff like that.
The most beautiful rattan weapons. Say what you will about the guy. He had a skill there.
Yeah, he did. Okay, so that's more than enough. It's a little tiny bit bigger than the rattan itself because I'm going to wrap the sword around, which will help shape the tip as well. But you can see I still have lots of compression. You don't want to do that too much until the glue sets, but it still has lots of compression, which is the important part of making the tip. Right? So I hope everybody can see that. So, okay. And then I'm only going to take down part of it just so you can see. You don't have to watch me tape the sword up, but you can. This is no matter. So same idea. I start the tape and then I just keep it tight as I roll it up, kind of on an angle so it feeds up without wrinkles. This is the only wrap that I will do that wraps around the sword instead of lengthwise, which I'll show you when I put the other tape on. So the idea of this is we use rattan because rattan flexes and bends. And if we use like oak handles and stuff, we would just break them all the time and it could cause injury. So we use rattan so it doesn't cause injury. But rattan will compress and crack, which is why it starts to end up breaking. The tape keeps the rattan flexible without it actually destroying itself too quickly. But it also, I think, stops the splinters from getting into your opponent, which of course is a big safety deal. So
sometimes you turn the rattan into sawdust and it'll keep all the sawdust in there too.
Yeah, that's my one thing that I don't really like about the rawhide swords is because the rawhide is thick. Don't get me wrong, they're beautiful. The guys that make the rawhide swords, damn, man, those are really cool. But my experience with them is I had the sword powdered and I didn't know until I watched a video of myself and watched the sword literally flex over the guy's shield, hit his helmet, flex over his helmet, then go straight off on the end. And I took it home and I opened the rattan, the rawhide up, and it was toast. The sword was completely crushed, and I couldn't tell. So just be wary when you're using the rawhide wraps.
So when you're spiral taping the sword, how much overlap do you have? Hardly any.
Hardly any. About 1/8 of an inch, but it doesn't matter. You could overlap it as much as you want to. I think of it as this way. I try to use the least amount of tape as possible because the tape in itself is really strong. And once the glue sets, it basically becomes like a sheath. So if you overlap it too much, then you're just adding a bunch of unnecessary weight to the sword, which it doesn't seem like much. It's just tape, but it adds up, which is weird, but it adds weight. So sometimes I'll actually even buy thicker tape to wrap the sword with, so it's faster. I didn't this time because I'm trying to show you something, but that is usually what I will use.
With the amount of strapping tape you use, can you feel that there is extra weight on the sword after you tape it up?
The amount that I use, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why is it important to spiral wrap it and not just like put it end to end, like in a straight thing?
Spiral wrapping helps it keep the shape of the sword. The sword is going to flex, and generally what happens I found is that as you hit over and over again, the rattan crushes. The tape actually helps, if it does crush, it helps keep the fibers all in the right place. Yeah, and it helps the spiral also helps stop the fibers from pulling out the edge of the sword, which, like I said, is dangerous. They come to die. I do end up wrapping the tip because most of your shots, if not all of your shots, will end up, 6 to 8 inches from the tip. You don't really need a lot of protection here, but you should still wrap it. Again, for the whole, I don't even think we're allowed to have exposed rattan when we fight. And I think that's in the AC, so.
It's not gonna be exposed.
Yeah.
That's not true. It's on a blade.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Probably just not on the blade.
Probably not in the blade, yeah. That makes sense. So as I'm getting closer to the end, I'm actually really like as tight as I possibly can. This stuff is tight, but if I did the whole thing as tight as I possibly can, I have to stop every 30 seconds to rest my wrist. But, so this is as tight as I possibly can because it's going to take all the stress.
So for people like me that are strapping tape challenged, if I am at an event and I have some strapping tape and I'm like making a gerrymandered lanyard because my trigger broke or whatever, what is the trick to make the strapping tape break without having a knife?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
If
All right,
you
never
can,
mind.
you're better than me because I can't make it do that. I can do that with duct tape and cloth tape, but okay, so here's the part that actually kind of matters. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up around the end of the thrusting tip, and I'm going to make it the same thickness as the rattan of the sword, and I'm going to go around a couple times, which helps secure it and helps keep the tip on there. Those of you that do use thrusting tips have found that the tips probably pop off because they'll take stress one way or the other. This, I've never had them pop off. They only tend to break, for me, the thrusting tips tend to break by having the tool dip portion, well, actually tool dip, oh yeah, look at that, it's actually just like this. So you can see that the actual yellow of the thrusting tip, that's the tool dip. And this is actually the tape on the end of the sword. And what happens is it's like a little cap of the tool dip that falls off. And it's actually a super easy fix. You just basically take the tape off, however long you tool dipped it and redip it, which is pretty cool. And you can tape it right back up again. So that's the normal break. And if we have time, I can actually show you how you do that. So as I wrap around the tip, I just barely go onto the tip a little tiny bit at a time to make sure that the tape is more or less parallel or not parallel, in line with the, parallel with the rest of the sword. So it actually looks pretty cool. Like you don't have this big giant lump on the end of your sword. Flush. Yeah, that's the right word. Yeah. So this helps shape the tip. This is actually also what I learned from Harvard. So, excuse me. So then I go back down a little bit. And I usually put another wrap on it, like I said, in that first 6 to 8 inches of the sword. Because again, that's where it takes all the stress. So I try to keep that as wrapped as tight as I possibly can, because that's going to take all the damage and the tape will help prevent the damage. I've actually seen a bunch of guys do a bunch of different things to help prevent the rattan from breaking. And all it does is add a huge amount of weight. And honestly, the rattan's supposed to break. That's how we don't hurt each other, is the rattan breaking instead of punch.
So I just want to endorse the way you do your thrusting tip, because I have seen a million people lose their thrusting tips while they're fighting. I have never ever lost a thrusting tip. Every once in a while, I'll lose a little tool dip cap.
Yeah.
But then I know that we need to do some repair. And I've never ever had a thrusting tip just like fall off.
Yeah, me neither. I stab a lot. All right, so I've got a double wrap, basically. Let's just go a little further. But you want to cover the sweet spot of the sword with 2 wraps of super tight tape, because that's going to take all the stress and it's going to take all the damage. But the rest is fine. That's all you need to do. So that's the basic taping of the thrusting tip. Now the next step is the actual golden step, which is tool dip, also called plastic dip. I know that some kingdoms make it, there's specific colors they have to be. I don't think we have that in our.
It just has to be a contrasting color.
A contrasting color, okay. I know some places have red, but mine are always yellow because the yellow is all I can find. But I know they have yellow and red and blue, and I think they even have black. But whatever, this is what you're looking for, and it's liquid rubber, essentially.
And so the plastic dip comes in a can like that, but there's also like a spray, right?
Yeah.
So you want the can, not the spray.
Yeah, I haven't had much luck with the spray. I mean, I imagine maybe because I just was impatient. I don't know. But I haven't had much luck with the spray. I find the dip works great. I think I will dip one. So fresh out of the can, like a brand new can, the stuff is really, really thin. I can usually get 2 or 3 swords out of it. You want to give it a good shake because it's separated quite a bit. So the first sword that you make out of the can that you just opened, you want it to dip it a lot because it'll be very thin. Each layer will be very, very thin. And you're basically looking to put about a 16th, I guess. Yeah, so this is what your end result will be. Should I show them dipping it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what you're looking for. That's about as far as you need to go down. That is, I would say, 3 or 4 coats. I don't really have a number. I just kind of look at it and feel the tip. Because the thin and thinness depends on how fresh the stuff is in the can. A new one like this, I'll do it at least 4 times minimum, if not 6. But that's the end result. And actually, what you end up having is this, which is kind of neat. It's this little cap essentially that the tool dip makes. And when your piece falls off like this, you just strip the tape off, and you can actually peel the cap off almost like a banana. So I don't know if you can see that very well. So that's essentially what we're trying to make as we dip the sword. And like I said, the stuff is super thin initially, so give it a really good shake and do it somewhere where you're not going to wreck anything if the urethane or whatever the hell it's made out of goes all over the place. So I just dip it straight into the can. And I just make sure that I don't overflow it. I don't know how well you can see that or not, but basically I just dip it into the length of the foam is all you really need, and then I go an inch or 2 past, so you can see how far I dipped it in. You can go further, it doesn't really matter too much. Just like anything, you add weight when you do this to the tip. So I'll let it run off. You can see how thin it is by how far it's running off. There we go.
Does it dry pretty quickly?
It does. I usually do about an hour in between each dip. I think we did like a super quick one time because we only had a short period of time, and I want to say I used a heat gun to dry it off, which worked. But if you don't have to, you don't have to.
So Duke Johann is asking, why don't you just dip the whole sword?
Well, I think
probably because the can's only so long.
Yeah, the can's only so long. That actually is part of it. That's why I went as deep as I did. Because I don't think the sword needs it. This is just keeping the thrusting tip on there. I imagine you could, especially with the spray paint stuff, or especially with the spray can tool dip, you probably could do the whole sword.
Somebody try to plastic dip your whole sword and tell us how it works. I think that would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I don't know if it would actually add anything though. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm
I
not
don't
sure how well it would take blows, like to rivets and stuff. Like I don't think it would hold up as well.
It might.
Don't you think it would rip?
I don't know.
I don't know. We're gonna do it.
Yeah.
We'll buy some spray stuff.
Yeah, you definitely couldn't do it with a
Check it
can, or you could, but it'd be a colossal pain in the butt. But you definitely could spray the whole sword. I don't see why you couldn't, but I also didn't see why you would. So.
Want me to?
Yeah. So you can see I've just sort of rolled it while the drip is coming off, like an ice cream cone. And then what I do actually is I stick the end in a pot of dirt, and then it just holds it straight up and down. But you can clamp it, or you can have your amazing wife hold on to it while it dries. But that's basically it. So I'll wait an hour. And you'll know, like if you touch it and it's sticking to your hand still, obviously you got to go a little bit longer. But it takes about an hour and it dries, especially in the sun, it dries even faster. So
and the fumes are glorious.
yeah.
Somebody's asking if we know whether Indian kingdoms don't allow tulip, and we don't. We pretty much just know what Ontario allows, but I know Vilius makes swords for our friends as well, and I don't think any of them have had a problem with plastic.
Yeah, I know
So
Avocall doesn't. I know
Avocall,
Cherie
Artemisia.
doesn't. Artemisia doesn't.
Who else have we made swords for?
That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, don't know. Look at your ABCs.
The closest I've ever come was somebody gave me crap because it was the wrong color. That's it, and that's when I was in wherever to move this from. Hey. So yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing too. If they don't have the right color, just get the right color tape and just tape right over where you tooled it. Change the color. Ta-da! I've done that before.
And told that you can just get that like at any hardware store, right?
I get it at Ace, but Home Depot has it. So does McLendon's. So does Harbor Freight is where I first found it. But I think even Amazon has it. So get it just about anywhere. I know there's also ones you can get. It's like a kit where you can pick what color you want, but I thought it was twice as expensive. So I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do it. The taping afterward. Okay, so what I do, yeah, okay. So the next step that I do, this is my finished one. I should actually have a sword that I can tape up. Well, I guess I could do that. Anyway, so this is cloth tape, also called hockey tape, which again you can get it at Big Five. You can get it at Canadian Tire if you're in Canada. It's just the cloth style tape that most of the time it says hockey tape on it. It's also called athletic tape. I like black and white, mostly because Misty and I watch ourselves on video a lot, and having a black blade with a white sword or vice versa, you know where your blade is and you can watch it hit if you hit flat or not, which is a big deal when you're trying to learn from your fight training video.
And also, like, people always try to see if you're hitting flat, and lots of times you're hitting at an angle. And when you hit at an angle, it can look flat if you don't mark your blade like really in good contrasting colors. But if you do mark your blade in good contrasting colors, you can actually tell that you're just hitting on the angle and it's still blade on.
Yeah. So I highly recommend, at least, the very least, if you use duct tape. I don't like duct tape. I actually find duct tape to be heavy. I don't know why. And I've actually had people say that cloth tape will absorb water and become heavy. I've never had that problem, but maybe I just didn't notice. So that's to each his own. I like the cloth tape. I like how the cloth tape goes on the sword. I think it looks better than duct tape. I even think that once it starts to shred, it looks better than duct tape. So, but to each his own.
And it's actually pretty easy to take off, unlike duct tape, which is all sticky and gummy. It's easy to take off and retape your sword so that it looks pretty again. Yeah,
I would agree with you, absolutely. So I don't spiral wrap the athletic tape because there's no reason to do it. The cloth tape and the duct tape aren't what's holding the sword together. They're sort of finishing it off. It's essentially trim in my mind. So I don't see any point in spiral wrapping your sword with the duct tape because I guess you could. I guess if your sword is falling apart, it would help reinforce it, but it's just as easy to strip the tape off and put the layer of tape on again. I know there's sort of like the joke about how if you take the old tape off, the sword forgets how to fight. But if you put more tape on, the sword gets heavier and heavier. So I don't see the point in doing that. You don't need to do that. And it gets heavier and heavier while being more rubbery. So you're kind of screwing yourself.
And then there's all the people that recommend changing your tape often anyway, so that you can see where you're hitting and and you don't give your opponent your tells of where you like to hit with the sword.
I don't know about that one, but it is good though, because I noticed, especially lefties, calling you out, is that usually right here on lefties, it's all destroyed because they'll tend to hit flat when they try to do their reach shot. But everybody has the same thing. Like if you've got a lot of chewed up part, or see, you can tell that Misty's right-handed because this blade is fine and this blade is chewed up, right? From being blocked and whatnot. So anyway, for whatever it's worth, and you can see the front of the blade where she hits all the time and not so much with the back.
Because I suck at wraps.
So yeah, so that's kind of a neat thing you can do if you want to. Yeah, but I would still, like I said, I highly recommend the content.
So is it one strip of tape on each side and then one strip of tape for the blade? Do 4 strips of tape cover the whole sword?
Depends on the thickness of the sword, but yes, I'll tape up this one here, just so you can see me do it. So this is 1.25" rattan. I think I put the tip on this one just to show somebody how I did it, which is why it's not really nothing to carve, but it doesn't matter. I can still put the tape on this the way I would a normal sword. So I'll just put the basket on real quick and.
Well, don't do the strapping.
No? Well, I wasn't going to. I was just going to take the basket off so I can show you how to finish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. On the basket hilts, again, it's your personal preference. I actually like the metal basket hilts. This is stainless steel. I had it made it work. I like the weight in my hand. I like the way the metal basket hilt feels. I prefer it. Nikki hates them. She prefers the plastic ones. So to each his own. I kind of feel like it's a broadsword versus a katana. That's sort of how I feel in my head. But it depends on whether you like the sword tip heavy or whether you like it more handle heavy. And that's a personal preference. That's up to you. I've seen really good arguments for both ways. So up to you. I will say though that whichever way you do it that way. Don't have both, because same with the length of the sword. Believe it or not, when you change the length of the sword, your technique and your timing of the blow will change. You can have a really short sword that weighs a ton, but if your timing is slightly off, they won't even feel it. And when I first changed to a shorter sword, I couldn't wrap anybody. Well, I could hit them, but nobody would take it. They just wouldn't even feel it. And I felt like I was like, ha ha, ha, you're dead. And they'd be like, nope. So just consistency is key. That's what we're going for. Oh yeah, sorry. I was grateful for the camera. I can see my hands there.
Isn't this supposed to be my golden sword?
No, no, I didn't do that. I should have done that. So I'm just going to stick this on super quick, and then I'll show you how I finished it off. Oh, I guess I can show you too how I put the basket on. So the basket hilt, it's not that complicated. I get my tape ready like I do, and then I have it sitting right where I want it. I put one piece of tape on just to check it. I'm a big believer in checking every step because I can't tell you how many times I've wrapped the tape up completely and, oh, nope, that's not right. I had to take it all apart again. So I just, one piece of tape on relatively loosely, and I make sure my hand fits in the trigger and that I'm not jamming up and I'm not bottoming out with the trigger. Once I know that that's fine, I then tape it up as tight as I can possibly make it. This is the other thing. So the hose clamps, they come loose. They always come loose. I've never not had a hose clamp come loose, and either from vibration or as the sword dries. Because I don't know what you, but my rattan sits outside until I'm ready to put it on a sword, and then it sits inside. Well, it sits in my armor bag, but same idea. And so it will shrink, and I think the hose clamp shrinks as well. So I don't like hose clamps, and I think they're unnecessary. You don't need them. You just you get your strapping tape.
I've seen some people take the strapping
tape, but I would love them to do that.
And they make it into like rope, like they.
Yeah.
And then they rope it on. Like,
yeah, I've done that too, but I find it unnecessary. If your basket hilt has a tendency to have the tape slide off, which I've never had, but I think the rope method might help because you could get it like super duper tight. But other than that, same idea. So I hold the tape and I twist and keep it super tight with my thumb. Hard to actually see, but I keep it tight with my thumb as I roll the sword. And I'm pulling down, keeping it as tight as I can. And I go around, I don't know, half a dozen times. I don't actually ever count. I just go around until it's like, yeah, that's on there. So. There we go. And I have had strapping tape come loose, but usually by the time it's loose, the sword needs to be retaped anyway. Or you just put another layer of strapping tape right over the top of it, which is the other reason why I highly recommend strapping tape over cloth tape. Now see, that's still pretty tight. With strapping tape on your basket hilt, if you're at an event and your basket hilt breaks, comes off, or whatever, you need another, it's not basket hilt, excuse me, hose clamp. You'll need another hose clamp to put on there, or you'll need tools or whatever. You just need tape, and everybody has tape. Duct tape will work. Anything will work. Just tape that thing on as hard as you possibly can. And I've never had a problem with it coming loose. So like I said, big fan of the tape over the hose clamp. Same idea. You just, same thing on the bottom. You just keep it super duper tight. If you're finding this is too hard on your arm, you can put it in a vise this way, and you can just go around it. Go around it this way in the vise. You'll be walking around it, but you can keep the tape super tight that way as well. And that's all I really ever need for my basket. Like I said, they don't come loose. So, and that's it. And then I put my blade on. So I used to be very meticulous about the white going on the flat and then the black going on the blade. But now what I do is I do the whole thing white, and then that way the black is very clear. You know, there's no little gaps anywhere, and it's because sometimes the sword goes in and out and it curves a little bit. But doing this way also, you can cheat. If your sword bends a little tiny bit, you can actually cheat where the blade is and make it look straighter than it actually is.
So someone just asked if we carve our handles so that our hands are in the middle of the basket hilt. And my answer is no. I think my hand usually sits up a quarter, like I'm up on the top third. Okay. It's not quite the middle. I would actually agree, Misty. It's the top third. So that camera. No.
Yeah. So I would say I would almost have it go as high as you can, as long as your knuckle isn't hitting the basket hilt. That's the key thing. It needs to sit in there. That's the other thing with metal basket hilts is guys with big hands, they have a bit of a problem, so they need ones like the Balder ones. This one's absolutely huge. It's almost like a shield on the end of my stick. I tend not to use it. I tend to use this one because I like it better, but
Okay.
But you can see it. And mine, it's in the middle because this basket hilt is relatively small. I don't know if you can see that, but
It's hard to see.
yeah. But I also only use one trigger finger, and it's tight. Like that's my hand won't go any lower than that, and I generally don't go any higher when I slide up and down the sword. So there. Okay. So tape. Yeah. So I will pull out a nice long length, the length of the sword, and I start on the tang and go to the tip. Now this doesn't have to be super tight. It doesn't have to be tight at all, actually. But you know, when it's nice and smooth, it looks better than when it's wrinkly. I'll just put a wrinkle in it because I'm clever. There we go. And then I keep a little bit away from the tip. I'll show you how I finish off the tip in a second. So I do it again and again until it's all the way around. I overlap the tape just a little tiny bit. Again, an 1/8 to a 1/16 is all you need. Just enough so it looks good and it doesn't have a gap. So
one of the cool things about the cloth tape, the hockey tape too, is that if you are one of those people that likes to name your sword or decorate your sword or whatever, it's a lot easier to use metallic paint pens or just Sharpies and do stuff up the white.
okay, so I lied. I guess I overlap it about 1/8 to a 1/4 of an inch, but nonetheless. And I leave about a 1/2 inch from the tip. And again. So the number of times I put strips up the sword, I don't actually know. It depends on the thickness of the sword. Which reminds me, I don't think you need to go any thicker. I personally don't like using 1 3/4 rattan. Sometimes it's all you can get. I find the heavier your rattan, the faster it breaks, because the weight just crushes in on itself. So I think 1.5 inches is absolutely perfect. 1 5/8 even, you know, of course you're not going to get exact, but I usually do this in a vise too, so it's nice and flat, exactly where I'm going to put the tape on, but obviously you don't need to. Yeah, we like to put the words on our swords. I think mine actually says something about Misty is magic, and the other side it says what's the line from Kung Fu Panda? I can see the cookie or visualize the cookie, something like that. Anyway, thanks for that.
That's kind of sweet.
I think if I make Misty a new one, it'll probably say "not your bitch" on it. Okay, so it's all white now. I overlapped it a little tiny bit, but it's nice and straight. Yeah, so then I put the blade on, and with black. There it is. And I go right from the tang for the blade. I just put it right onto the tang because I know that that's essentially, and not essentially, that is where the blade would be. And up to the sword tip. And I just sort of at this point, I just kind of look at it and see if it's nice and straight. You'll see it. Your eye will catch it right away if it's not straight. But I put it on the exact same way I put on the white. So I lay it down, give it a smoother too, so there's no wrinkles. And then I put the one on the back. Same idea. So opposite side of the tang. Okay, so there it is. And even on camera, you can really tell where the blade is, right? So that's pretty sweet. So you can see when you're hitting whether it's flat or not because of the black and white. So I highly recommend that. And then I usually just put one around the tip to stop it from peeling back. Not that it really ever does, but. And it's important that you make sure that they can still see, you know, that you have a thrusting tip on there, because some marshals are very specific about that. No, that's it. Oh, and if you did have to change the color of the tool tip because you needed red or you needed whatever, put that tape on before you put your cloth tape on, because the cloth tape is essentially trim, right? So you put your red tape on, make the tip red, and then you put the rest of the trim on the rest of the sword. So it makes it pretty. And then I usually do one around the base as well. One last important thing before you go out and you hit the pel with this thing is let the glue set for like an hour or so. Overnight's best, of course, but doesn't really matter. So I like to put the black over the strapping tape just to sort of hide the strapping tape, but you don't have to. It's usually just what I do.
Makes it look finished.
Yeah. So just around, and then the tip, just around. Yeah, it makes it look finished. Yeah, that's right. So there you go. That's how I make the sword, and then usually I'll write on it at this point in time in a Jiffy marker. But
cool.
So let me see that one and see if it's dry. So, I mean, okay, so it's got a little tiny bit of a wet point. You can't really see it because the light's bouncing off it, but I can see it. It's shinier than the others, but that's good enough to dip again. So, I mean, what was that, 20 minutes maybe? So, yeah, I could totally just dip it again right now. And why not?
So does anyone have any questions?
So again, I would do this because of how thin it is. I would do it at least 4 times. But even if it is too thin, the worst thing that I've had happen is the little cap comes off early, and then you just take the tape off, the cloth tape off, and you can dip it right again, right over the old strapping tape.
So somebody just asked if we name our swords.
I don't know if we name them so much as we have a saying on them.
Yeah. What does this one say?
That says Misty is magic.
Oh, that says Misty is magic.
Yeah. And then the other side, I believe, says I can see the cookie, or I believe the cookie, or something like that.
Visualize the cookie.
Yeah. So, and again, I just sort of roll it until it stops dripping like constantly, and then I store it somewhere like that. Straight up and down. Like I said, I usually put it in the planter, but
Someone says, I know you have a trigger, but why no lanyard as well? I flipping hate lanyards. I know people can ignore them. I cannot ignore them. They just bother me. I do not ever use a lanyard unless my trigger broke and I have to have something to pass inspection.
me too. I find the lanyard, I don't know, it bugs me. I find it wrap it around and I don't like it. And then when you want to drop your sword, you gotta like get it off. So I don't like that either. But yeah, so I'll dip it 4 times until it's dry, and then I will put the tape on just like I did this one. So I think that's all I can think of.
Yep.
Like I said, carve the handle. It's very important. If it's breaking, I really suggest you look at how tightly you're grabbing onto the sword, because I suspect that you've got a death grip on it, and that will break the sword. I've also had people tell me, I've got big hands, so I don't need to carve my handle down. Duke Davin has some of the biggest hands I've ever seen on a human being ever. In fact, I'm not even sure he is human sometimes. He's just so big. And he carves his handle exactly the same way I do. So there it is. Size of the hand doesn't matter. And hammers have been like this for 2,000 years at least. So I highly recommend it, carving it down to at least it's a comfortable grip. So
cool. Well, thank you very much for showing your way of doing it.
Yep.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Next week, I am having a roundtable discussion with a whole bunch of royal peers about preparing for crown, and how preparing for crown or to win crown is not presumptuous. It's being prepared, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be prepared to win crown. So come join us for that. It should be fun. We have people from all over. And I'm looking forward to talking to them. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. Yep. And thank you all for joining us. See you next time.